Good morning, my friends. My name is Gerdes. I'm just a professor trying to provide context in the war in Ukraine. It is Tuesday, October 15th, 2024. Here's what's happening today. 1,210 Russians off the battlefield. It's a little lower than the peak average, but it's high for the overall war. 13 tanks off the battlefield, 44 fighting vehicles, 9 artillery systems, 32 vehicles, and fuel tanks. So when we look at Andrew Perpetua's list, we see that it's a little better than 1-to-1, a little bit more Russian losses than Ukrainian losses. Not great, but that's where we are. When we see what has been shot down overnight, a 0 out of 7 ballistic missiles, 0 out of 2 cruise missiles. Usually they have a pretty good ratio of hitting cruise missiles, and they are pretty terrible at knocking down ballistic missiles. 12 out of 17 Shahed drones were shot down, 4 out of 17 down from electronic warfare. Either way, if they're down, they're down. But Shahed drones, I was thinking about this earlier, and I was thinking, like, why do they keep doing it? Shahed drones provide a value, even if they get knocked down a lot, because they can still harass and terrorize the population. And it looks like that's really what Russia's going for here. Okay. Now, remember, 7 ballistic missiles over 5 S-300 missiles hit Mykolaiv, resulting in the death of 1 woman, 16 injured. 1 residential area, infrastructure, private homes, and cars were damaged. In another, a restaurant complex, market pavilions caught on fire with a blaze covering 1,400 square meters. Okay, so they're attacking civilian populations. This does not mean that they don't, during the day, attack military populations, but at night, they're attacking and harassing civilian population. And this showed a total of 17 victims. Now, this is an interesting little bit here. I'm going to show this guy what he's saying, but Russia is destroying things actively and passively by simply not allowing Ukrainians to do what Ukrainians need to do. In order for the vineyard not to destroy itself, it needs to be cut every year. Last year, there was no one here at all. Vineyards in Kherson region are deteriorating after Russian occupation. Due to Russia's occupation in 2022 and the proximity of the front line, winemakers in Kherson region are experiencing difficulties. Here's a 75-year-old winemaker saying the people are afraid to be there. A mine hit here. You see everywhere. There are fragments everywhere. I'd be afraid to be there too. It looks like this, and it's still there. In order to prevent the vineyard from destroying itself, it needs to be cut every year. We cut it and throw most of it on the ground. Last year, there was no one here at all. There was a lot of shelling. We didn't even go into the field. We started cutting too late. Many people come here and pick the grapes on their own. We allow them to do so. People are afraid to come here and pick grapes and trade. To pick grapes, you need to take 20 people into the field. It's a lot, and it's dangerous. Okay, back to active means of harassing the population. The ISW reports that Russia aims to undermine Ukraine's grain corridor through repeated Odessa port attacks. Russian forces struck the port of Odessa on 14 October, damaging 2 civilian vessels and port infrastructure. It's the 4th attack on ports since 5 October. So they've been doing this significantly in the last 2 weeks, and it's really interesting to watch because this hasn't happened since the Russians had a real presence in the Black Sea, and they're just doing it with missiles from a distance now. Now let's look at the front lines. Russian sources claim that Russian forces recaptured positions in Kursk Oblast. Ukrainian forces recently regained positions in central Toretsk. Russian forces recently conducted a reduced battalion-sized mechanized assault in the Kurakhov direction and recently made confirmed advances. Right now, the Russians realize they have only so much time before winter, so they're pushing and pushing and pushing, seeing what kind of ground they can get. Now, I thought this was fascinating. Russian military complained that in the rear of the Kursk region, on their supply and evacuation roads, someone suddenly decided to set up anti-tank barriers, dragon teeth, which led to injuries and deaths of dozens of Russian servicemen, as one of the Russian sources says, on the evacuation routes where cars can rush from FPV drones at 150 kilometers per hour without any identification marks. More than 40 people died in just one day, the same number injured. More accidents in an hour than FPV records in a week. So the Russians are doing that to themselves. But it doesn't really matter in their calculation because they don't need to prepare for winter. They don't need to be aware of the dragon's teeth because they're going to just be used up, and people in the back are going to be safer because these people are being used up. Meanwhile, Russian forces have recently resumed tactical offenses in Donetsk-Zaporizhia region border area and have made tactical gains in localized assaults, but this activity so far does not appear to be part of a larger offensive effort in western Donetsk region. Now, this isn't a current photo, but it's interesting seeing what is happening in the contrast. Russian forces are not preparing for winter on the front and are trying to achieve the goals before the frost sets in, according to spokesperson for the Operational Tactical Group Luhansk. While Ukrainian troops are actively preparing for winter conditions, Russians are relying on the dry weather in Donetsk region. So, yeah, they're trying to make gains in the meantime, but don't worry about it, about training them for or getting them ready for the winter. They're going to be wiped out before that happens anyway, and they'll just send more. Switching gears, chronically ill in occupied Ukraine lose free meds without Russian passports. Russia's new policy, set to take effect in 2025, affects all medical categories, including chronic conditions like diabetes and asthma. This has already taken place in some parts of the occupied territory before, but it's happening across the board now. In addition to persecuting pro-Ukrainian locals and resettling large numbers of Russians to alter the ethnic composition and tighten control over occupied territories. Remember, the propagandists were saying, hey, there's cheap real estate down there in these new Russian territories. Go down there. You can get bargain deals. Russia has implemented multiple illegal policies, forcing Ukrainians to take Russian citizenship, while schools indoctrinate local children with anti-Ukrainian sentiments within the occupied Ukrainian territories. There's an anti-war rally held in New York by Russians, but it's not quite what you think. They demanded to liberate political prisoners, stop the war, and send Putin to trial to be held accountable for his atrocious crimes. Russia cannot intimidate NATO with threats, says NATO boss Mark Rutte. Our message to Putin is clear. We will continue and we will do whatever it takes to ensure that he does not succeed and that Ukraine will win. Now, that's good. The messaging is good. The actions are what's important here. Meanwhile, in Israel, Israel is ready to strike military targets in Iran, not nuclear or oil facilities, according to the Washington Post. Netanyahu's decision to take a more restrained stance was reportedly influenced by Washington's dispatch of the powerful THAAD missile defense system to Tel Aviv. Okay, Hungary and Gazprom are discussing a 2025 deal for additional gas purchases, aiming to maximize the use of Turkish Stream for increased fuel volumes, says the Hungarian foreign minister. Now, Hungary has had just as much time to adjust to the reality of the war between Russia and Ukraine as anyone else. But they had the contract going through Ukraine, but they got complacent, thinking they were just going to keep this going when clearly Ukraine did not want to keep it going. So now they're looking for another way to keep the price low, which I understand, but they're doing it at the expense of Ukrainians, which I don't understand. Okay. Just a couple more things. Softening the blow to the humiliation that Ukrainian forces still can't be forced out of Russia's Kursk region. Russian propagandists are telling Russians that it's America that's there. Sure, that's what it is. It's America fighting on the front lines in Kursk. So I saw this meme and I thought that's pretty accurate. There's the European Union, there's Ukraine holding back a dam of the Russian flood. But that dam can only hold but so long and take so much pressure without reinforcement, and it needs to be reinforced. I'll leave you with this image. The great tragedy of the Ukrainian people is reflected in this photo when the best sons of Ukraine die for the freedom and independence of their native country. That's all that I have, my friends. Thank you for the likes and the shares and the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person who cares about Ukraine.